My name is Cassandra Mitchell, though everyone calls me Cassie. I'm 28 years old, and 6 months ago, my life changed forever when I inherited $26 million from my grandparents. They raised me while my parents were too busy building their separate lives. I never imagined that this inheritance would tear what little family I had apart, revealing the true colors of those who should have loved me unconditionally. Money doesn't just talk, it screams the truth about people's character. Before I share how my life changed forever, let me know where you're watching from and subscribe to hear more stories about family, loyalty, and standing your ground. I grew up in a small town in Vermont, in a colonial-style house with a wraparound porch where my grandmother Martha would serve lemonade in the summer. The house sat on 5 acres of land with maple trees that my grandfather Harold tapped every spring to make his famous maple syrup. It was picturesque. The kind of childhood setting most people dream about. But inside that perfect-looking family picture was a complicated reality. My parents, Thomas and Diana Mitchell, were rarely present in my daily life. Dad worked as an investment banker, which meant constant travel and 70-hour work weeks. Mom pursued her interior design career with equal intensity, flying between Boston, New York, and Chicago for clients. Their careers always came first, before each other, before me. When I was 4, they started leaving me with my grandparents on weekends. By the time I was 6, I was living with Grandma and Grandpa full-time, with my parents visiting for dinner once or twice a month when their schedules allowed. They called it a temporary arrangement that somehow lasted throughout my entire childhood. Grandpa Harold had built a successful furniture business from scratch. He started in his garage, crafting handmade wooden pieces that gained popularity throughout New England. By the time I came to live with them, they had a workshop and showroom in town with 15 employees. Despite their success, they lived modestly. Grandpa drove the same Ford pickup for 20 years, and Grandma clipped coupons for the weekly grocery shopping. My earliest clear memory is sitting on a stool in Grandpa's workshop, watching him sand the edges of a cherrywood table. "Smooth edges matter, Cassie girl," he'd say. "In furniture and in life." He let me help with small tasks, teaching me patience and attention to detail. I'd proudly wear the child-sized apron Grandma had sewn for me, with "Future Carpenter" embroidered across the front. Grandma Martha was the backbone of both the family and the business. She handled the books, managed customer service, and still made sure dinner was on the table every night at 6. She taught me to cook, starting with simple cookies and gradually moving to full meals by the time I was 12. "Self-reliance is freedom," she would tell me while showing me how to balance a checkbook or change a tire. Every Sunday morning meant pancake breakfast, a tradition that never wavered. Grandpa would make his special batter with a secret ingredient, which I later learned was a splash of vanilla and a pinch of cinnamon, and Grandma would set the table with her blue willow china, not the everyday dishes. "We use the good china because Sundays with you are special," she'd say. My parents were invited but rarely showed. When I was 8, I had the lead in the school play. I still remember peeking through the curtain, scanning the audience, and seeing my grandparents in the front row. Grandpa had closed the shop early, something he almost never did. My parents had promised to come but called last minute. Dad had an emergency meeting, Mom had a client crisis. Grandma took a video to show them, but they never asked to see it. For my 10th birthday, Grandpa built me a beautiful desk for my homework. "Education is the one thing nobody can ever take from you," he said as he showed me the hidden compartments he'd designed specially. Grandma added, "And a Mitchell always has a proper place to do their work." They attended every parent-teacher conference, science fair, and soccer game. They weren't just standing in, they were fully invested in raising me. When I turned 13 and went through the typical teenage rebellion, testing boundaries and sometimes being downright disrespectful, my grandparents handled it with firm consistency. They never yelled but never backed down on the values they were teaching me. When I missed curfew, Grandpa sat me down in his study. "Disappointment hurts more than anger," he said quietly. That affected me more than any punishment could have. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents grew more distant. Dad would bring extravagant gifts when he visited, perhaps out of guilt. But couldn't remember what grade I was in. Mom would call to chat about herself but rarely asked about my life. They missed my high school graduation because they had finalized their divorce that same month, each two caught up in their own drama to attend. Grandma and Grandpa hosted a special dinner for me instead, inviting my closest friends. Family is who shows up, Grandma whispered as she hugged me that night. Through it all, my grandparents never spoke ill of my parents in front of me. They're doing their best in their own way, Grandma would say, though I sometimes caught the concerned glances she exchanged with Grandpa. Later I discovered they had numerous arguments with my parents about their absence in my life, but they shielded me from those conflicts. What I didn't know during those years was that my grandparents' business had grown considerably successful. They had expanded to 3 showrooms across New England, begun an e-commerce operation, and invested wisely in real estate and stocks. Their modest lifestyle wasn't out of necessity but choice. Wealth should be a quiet thing, Grandpa once said when I asked why he still drove his old truck when he could afford a new one. The moment you flash it around, it starts to own you instead of you owning it. By the time I finished high school, my grandparents had become my true parents in every way that mattered. They'd taught me about integrity, hard work, financial responsibility, and the importance of giving back. They'd shown up. They'd been consistent. They'd built a foundation for me that would prove more valuable than any inheritance. What I didn't realize then was how deliberately they were preparing me for the future they envisioned, one where I would need to stand on my own principles and make difficult choices about family, money, and loyalty. When college acceptance letters started arriving, my grandparents sat me down at the kitchen table where we'd shared thousands of meals. "You can go anywhere you want, Cassie," Grandpa said, his voice gentle but serious. "We've set aside money for your education." I chose Boston University to study business marketing. Though my grandparents could have easily paid for everything, I insisted on working part-time. Grandma smiled knowingly when I told her. "Independence suits you," she said, helping me pack. The day they dropped me off at my dorm, Grandpa handed me an envelope. Inside was a debit card and a note explaining they'd deposited enough for emergencies and occasional treats, but not enough to avoid learning to budget. "Make mistakes while they're still small," the note read in Grandma's precise handwriting. My father sent a text, "Good luck at school. Let me know if you need anything." My mother called once to ask if my dorm room had decent design potential before launching into a story about her latest high-profile client. Neither asked about my classes or adjustment to college life. Those 4 years at BU shaped me profoundly. I worked at the campus bookstore, then as a social media assistant for a local boutique. I learned to stretch my budget, cook affordable meals in a tiny kitchen, and balance work with academics. I made the dean's list every semester. My roommate Alicia came from a wealthy family who gave her unlimited funds. She struggled with basic budgeting and was constantly overdrawing her account. "How do you always have money left at the end of the month?" she asked me once. I realized then how valuable my grandparents' lessons had been. Every Sunday, without fail, I called my grandparents. Grandma would put me on speakerphone so Grandpa could join from his favorite armchair. They never pried but always listened attentively about my classes, friends, and campus activities. When I landed my first marketing internship sophomore year, they sent a care package with homemade cookies and a handcrafted business card holder from Grandpa's workshop. Meanwhile, my parents' lives had taken separate paths after their divorce. Dad remarried a woman named Stephanie who was only 12 years older than me. They had twins when I was in my junior year, half-siblings I barely knew. Dad occasionally sent gifts but rarely called. Mom moved to a luxury condo in Chicago and focused on building her design brand, courting celebrity clients and posting constantly on social media about her glamorous projects. She'd call sporadically, usually when she'd had too much wine, lamenting that we weren't closer but making no real effort to visit or know me. During my senior year, I met with the career counselor who reviewed my resume. "Your experience at your grandparents' business gives you an edge," she noted. I'd worked summers at Mitchell Furniture, learning everything from inventory management to customer service. That connection helped me land my first job at Nielsen Marketing in Boston after graduation. Starting salary was modest, but I was determined to make it on my own. I found a small apartment with another BU grad, bought second-hand furniture, and continued living frugally. When colleagues complained about student loans, I felt a wave of gratitude for my grandparents' foresight. They had given me the freedom to choose a career I loved rather than chasing the highest paycheck to repay debt. I worked hard, earned promotions, and gradually built my own professional reputation. By 26, I was managing major accounts and had moved to a one-bedroom apartment I could afford on my own. I'd started a modest investment portfolio, following the principles Grandpa had taught me. Live below your means, save consistently, and never gamble what you can't afford to lose. Meanwhile, my grandparents were slowing down. Grandpa's hands, once so steady with his woodworking tools, had begun to shake slightly from arthritis. Grandma, always energetic, needed afternoon naps. They had gradually handed over daily operations of the business to trusted long-term employees but remained involved in major decisions. I visited at least once a month, sometimes more often when I noticed concerning changes. I started scheduling their medical appointments and helping manage their medications. We'd come full circle, they had cared for me, and now I was beginning to care for them. During one of these visits, Grandma took me into her study where she kept important family documents. "There are things you should know," she said, showing me their will, insurance policies, and business paperwork. I was uncomfortable discussing their mortality but recognized their practical approach to aging. They wanted me prepared, not caught off guard. What they didn't show me was the full extent of their assets or the specific provisions of their will. "All in good time," Grandpa said when I asked about succession plans for the business. "Just know we've taken care of everything." The last Thanksgiving we spent together, both my parents made rare appearances. Dad brought his new family, Mom arrived late with an expensive bottle of wine and stories about her latest celebrity client. The tension around the table was palpable. My parents sniped at each other while competing for my grandparents' attention. I noticed Grandma watching their interaction with a calculating look I hadn't seen before. After dinner, I overheard Dad asking Grandpa about investing in a sure thing while Mom cornered Grandma in the kitchen, mentioning an unexpected tax situation she needed help with. Both conversations ended abruptly when they realized I was within earshot. That night, as I helped Grandma with the dishes, she said something I'd reflect on later: "Blood makes you related, Cassie, but loyalty and love make you family. Remember that when difficult choices come." I couldn't have known then just how prophetic her words would prove to be, or that within 6 months, both my grandparents would be gone, leaving me with an inheritance that would reveal the true nature of my family ties. The call came on a rainy Tuesday morning in April. I was preparing for a client presentation when my phone lit up with my grandparents' number. Instead of Grandma's warm voice, I heard their neighbor Susan, her words coming in broken sobs. "There's been an accident, car crash, both of them, the ambulance." I don't remember much about the next few hours, grabbing my go bag, the desperate drive to Vermont, the hollow feeling spreading through my chest. By the time I reached the hospital, it was too late. Grandpa had died instantly when another driver crossed the center line. Grandma, critically injured, had held on just long enough to ask about him, then slipped away minutes before I arrived. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of funeral arrangements, condolence calls, and paperwork. I moved through it all in a fog of grief, sleeping in my childhood bedroom surrounded by the life they had built. Their absence echoed through every room of the house. I'd catch myself listening for Grandpa's heavy footsteps or expecting to smell Grandma's lavender hand cream. My parents showed appropriate sadness but seemed disconnected from the depth of loss I felt. Dad helped arrange the funeral service but spent most of the time on business calls. Mom fussed about the flower arrangements and what people were wearing rather than sharing meaningful memories. 3 weeks after the funeral, Mr. Brennan, my grandparents' attorney of 30 years, called a meeting to read the will. I arrived at his wood-paneled office to find my parents already there. Dad was checking his watch impatiently, Mom was scrutinizing the decor with professional criticism. "Before we begin," Mr. Brennan said after we were seated, "I want to express my personal condolences, Cassandra." Harold and Martha were not just clients but dear friends. He opened a thick folder and adjusted his reading glasses. This will is the final testament of Harold and Martha Mitchell, revised and signed 6 months ago with sound mind and proper witnesses. What followed left us all stunned. My grandparents had amassed a fortune of $26 million through their business, smart investments, and property holdings. The family home, valued at nearly $2 million, the furniture business worth $12 million, and various investments totaling another $12 million. All of it, every penny, they left to me. To our beloved granddaughter, Cassandra Elizabeth Mitchell, Mr. Brennan read, "We leave our entire estate, with full confidence in her judgment, values, and character. She has been the joy of our lives and has demonstrated the wisdom to manage this inheritance responsibly." There were specific instructions about charitable donations they wished made in their names and suggestions for the business, but no obligations. The will explicitly stated that I had complete control over all assets. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat frozen, unable to process the magnitude of what I'd just heard. $26 million. It seemed impossible. Then my father's voice cut through the silence. "This can't be right." His face had flushed deep red. "I'm their son. There must be provisions for me." Mr. Brennan looked at him steadily. "There are no such provisions, Thomas. The will is quite clear." Mom's laugh was brittle. "This has to be a mistake. Or worse, undue influence." She shot me an accusatory look. "I assure you," Mr. Brennan said firmly, "Harold and Martha were of completely sound mind when they made these decisions. And I can personally attest that this distribution reflects their wishes exactly as they expressed them to me over many years." Dad stood up, pacing the room. "My parents built that business. I should at least inherit part of it. You chose a different path, Thomas, Mr. Brennan replied calmly. "Your parents respected that choice, but they also made their own decisions accordingly." The meeting deteriorated from there. My parents demanded copies of all documents, questioned the will's validity, and barely contained their anger. Through it all, I sat silently, still processing my grandparents' final act of love and trust. As we left Mr. Brennan's office, Dad grabbed my arm. "We need to talk about this," he hissed. "This isn't right." "Not now," I said, pulling away. "I need time." That night alone in my apartment, I cried for hours, not about the money, but about the weight of responsibility my grandparents had entrusted to me. I also cried knowing what would come next. The shift in my parents' demeanor at the reading told me everything I needed to know about the battles ahead. The first call came at 6 a.m. the next morning. Dad's voice was carefully controlled. "I've been thinking, Cassie. I know this is a difficult time, but we need to discuss dividing the inheritance fairly." "I'm still grieving, Dad," I replied. "We all are," he said dismissively. "But business continues. I'm thinking a 50-50 split between you and me would be appropriate. After all, they were my parents." When I didn't immediately agree, his tone hardened. "You need to understand your position here. I can contest this will. It would get ugly." Mom's approach came later that day, wrapped in false concern. "Darling, $26 million is an enormous responsibility. You're so young to handle that kind of money. I'm worried about you." She paused artfully. "I could help manage it. We could set up a family trust." What neither of them acknowledged was their decades-long absence from my life, or the fact that my grandparents had made their wishes unmistakably clear. They didn't see me as Cassie, the granddaughter who had been loved and raised by Harold and Martha. They saw me as an obstacle to money they believed should be theirs. That night, I sat in my living room surrounded by photo albums and keepsakes from my grandparents. One picture showed Grandpa teaching me to fish, his weathered hands guiding mine on the rod. Another captured Grandma and me baking bread, flour dusting our cheeks as we laughed. These weren't just my grandparents, they were my real parents in all the ways that mattered. I made a decision that night. Whatever came next, I would honor their final wishes. Not just because they'd given me everything, but because they'd trusted me with their legacy. The inheritance wasn't just money, it was their life's work, their values, their hopes for the future. I had no idea how brutal the coming conflict would be, or how it would force me to stand firmer than I ever had before. The conflict began as a simmer but quickly reached a boiling point. 3 days after the will reading, Dad called again. "I've been talking to a lawyer," he said without preamble. "There are grounds to challenge the will. Undue influence is the obvious angle." "Undue influence?" I repeated, stunned. "Dad, I never asked them for anything." "You lived with them your entire childhood," he countered. "They were elderly and clearly manipulated." The accusation stung like a physical slap. "They were sharp until the end. You know that." "What I know," he said, his voice hardening, "is that I'm their son, and I deserve my share. Half that money should be mine by right." When I didn't immediately concede, he escalated. "Think carefully about fighting me on this, Cassandra. I have resources. I have connections. This could get very ugly for you." My mother's approach was more subtle but equally relentless. She invited me to lunch at an expensive restaurant, arriving in a designer outfit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Throughout the meal, she dropped casual mentions of her financial struggles. "The design business is so unstable, darling," she sighed, sipping her third glass of wine. "One month you're flush, the next you're scrambling to pay studio rent." "I've been thinking of downsizing my condo." When I expressed sympathy but didn't offer money, her demeanor chilled. "I carried you for 9 months, she said, her voice dropping. "I gave you life. And now you sit there with millions while I struggle? What kind of daughter does that make you?" I tried reasoning with her. "Grandma and Grandpa had specific wishes, Mom. This was their decision." "They were spiteful," she snapped, mask slipping. "They always resented that I chose career over small-town life. This is their final way of punishing me." The text messages started next. From Dad, "Your grandfather would be ashamed of your selfishness." From Mom, "I never thought my own daughter would be so cold-hearted." Then came the flying monkeys. My father's wife Stephanie called, her voice syrupy sweet. "Thomas is really hurting, Cassie. He just lost his parents, and now to be cut out of their legacy, couldn't you find some compromise?" My mother's sister Aunt Judy, who I barely knew, emailed, "Your mother is family. Blood means obligation. Do the right thing." The pressure built when Dad showed up unannounced at my apartment one evening. I opened the door to find him standing there, eyes bloodshot. "We need to settle this," he said, pushing past me into my living room. He looked around critically at my modest furnishings. "You're living like this while sitting on millions. It's absurd." "I haven't touched the money," I said quietly. "I'm still figuring things out." "There's nothing to figure out," he exploded. "I'm their son. That business was built to pass to me. They owed me that legacy." "You chose banking over furniture," I reminded him. "You told Grandpa his work was quaint compared to Wall Street." His face darkened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I was there for those conversations," I countered. "I heard how you dismissed their work while asking for loans for your investment schemes." That struck a nerve. Those investments would have paid off if they'd given me the capital I needed. The argument escalated until he issued an ultimatum: "Give me half, or I'll contest the will. I'll drag your name through court. I'll make sure everyone knows how you manipulated 2 elderly people." After he left, I sat shaking on my couch. This wasn't grief talking, this was naked entitlement. The father who had barely participated in my life now believed he deserved half of what my grandparents had built and explicitly left to me. My phone pinged with a text from an unknown number: "Your mother is having anxiety attacks because of your cruelty. Hope you're proud of yourself." It was from someone in my mother's social circle, a woman I'd met perhaps twice. The campaign expanded. My parents began contacting my friends, colleagues, even my boss, spinning tales about how I was mentally unstable after my grandparents' death, making poor decisions, needing family intervention. I discovered this when my friend Tyler called, concerned. "Your dad reached out to me on LinkedIn. He's worried about you handling stress and money. Is everything okay?" My boss called me into her office the next day. "I received a strange call from a woman claiming to be your mother. She suggested you might need extended leave for mental health reasons. Is there something going on I should know about?" The invasion of my professional life crossed a line. That evening, I called my parents individually and set a boundary: stop contacting people in my life. This is between us. Their responses revealed everything. "Dad, you've left me no choice but to protect the family interests." "Mom, if you were thinking clearly, we wouldn't need to intervene." The next escalation came in written form. A formal letter from my father's attorney alleging undue influence and testamentary incapacity regarding my grandparents' will, demanding mediation before proceeding to court. That same week, I received a voicemail from my mother, her words slurred: "You know I'm having financial problems. The IRS is auditing me. I might lose everything, while you hoard millions. What kind of monster have you become?" The emotional toll became physical. I developed insomnia, lost weight, and started having panic attacks. During a presentation at work, my hands trembled so badly I had to excuse myself. I began seeing a therapist who specialized in family conflict and grief. The breaking point came when I overheard my father talking on his phone outside my apartment building one evening. He didn't see me approaching as he said, "Once we get control of the money, we'll need to liquidate the business assets quickly. I know a developer interested in the property." I froze, hidden behind a parked car. The business my grandparents had built from nothing, that employed 15 people who had been like extended family, he planned to sell it off for quick cash. In that moment, something crystallized within me. This wasn't just about money. It was about honoring or destroying my grandparents' legacy. They hadn't just left me wealth, they'd entrusted me with their life's work, their values, and their community impact. I realized then that compromising wouldn't satisfy my parents. They didn't want fair shares, they wanted control. They would take everything my grandparents had built and dismantle it for quick profit. That night, I made the hardest decision of my life. There would be no negotiation, no splitting of assets, no compromise that betrayed my grandparents' explicit wishes. I would fight to protect what they had entrusted to me, even if it meant losing what little family I had left. As if testing my resolve, my phone rang at midnight. It was my father. "This is your last chance," he said without greeting. "Agree to our terms, or tomorrow we file in court." "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm respecting their wishes." "Then you're dead to me," he replied and hung up. Those 4 words should have devastated me. Instead, they brought an unexpected clarity. The father who had been largely absent my entire life couldn't actually disown me, he had never really claimed me to begin with. The morning after my father's ultimatum, Stephanie called. Unlike her previous attempts at manipulation, this time her true feelings burst through. "You selfish little witch," she hissed. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to this family? Thomas hasn't slept in weeks. We have the twins' private school tuition coming due, the mortgage on the lake house, and investment opportunities that need capital now." Her unfiltered words revealed volumes. This wasn't about family legacy or emotional connection to my grandparents. This was about lifestyle maintenance and financial convenience. "I'm sorry you're struggling," I said, maintaining composure. But my grandparents' wishes were clear. "They were vindictive old people who played favorites," she snapped. "Thomas is their son. Blood matters more than who they babysit." After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table, thoughts swirling. Why had my grandparents left everything specifically to me? They weren't cruel or vindictive people. There had to be reasons beyond the obvious bond we shared. That afternoon, I received a formal legal letter from my mother's attorney, outlining her intent to challenge the will based on mental incapacity and undue influence. The document included a settlement offer. If I transferred $10 million to her immediately, she would drop potential litigation. My phone rang continuously, relatives I barely knew, family friends offering to mediate, even my parents' lawyers trying to pressure me directly rather than going through proper channels. I stopped answering unknown numbers. The stress crescendoed until I experienced a full-blown panic attack during a client meeting. I couldn't catch my breath, my vision tunneled, and I was certain I was having a heart attack. A concerned colleague drove me to urgent care, where the doctor diagnosed anxiety and prescribed medication. That night, sitting in my darkened apartment, I hit emotional rock bottom. Was $26 million worth this level of stress and family destruction? Maybe I should just give them each a few million to make this stop. I was one person against a growing army of relatives, lawyers, and flying monkeys. In my lowest moment, I remembered something. During my last visit with my grandparents, Grandma had mentioned organizing old papers in the attic and finding letters she wanted me to have when the time was right. With everything that happened after their deaths, I'd forgotten about it. The next day, I drove to Vermont and the family home I now owned but hadn't fully moved into. It felt both comforting and painful to walk through the quiet rooms, still filled with their presence. In the attic, I found the box Grandma had mentioned, labeled simply for Cassie. Inside were bundles of letters, journals, and documents spanning decades. I brought them downstairs to Grandpa's study and began reading. What I discovered changed everything. The first journal entry, dated from when I was 7 years old, revealed Grandma's concerns. Thomas called again asking for money. Third time this year. Says it's for investment opportunity, but Harold discovered he's gambling again. We refused. He threatened to take Cassie away if we don't support his ventures. As if he's ever been a father to that child. We're consulting our attorney tomorrow about permanent guardianship. Another entry, years later, Diana called drunk, crying about her credit card debt. Wanted us to pay it off again. When we suggested financial counseling instead, she hung up. These are not responsible people. Our focus must remain on securing Cassie's future. There were letters from my father to my grandparents, requesting loans for increasingly fantastic investment schemes. Letters from my mother asking for money to launch various business ventures that never materialized. Bank statements showing previous loans that were never repaid. Most revealing was a letter from my grandparents to their attorney, written just after my college graduation. We've made the decision to leave our entire estate to Cassandra. Thomas and Diana have demonstrated repeatedly that they cannot manage money responsibly. More importantly, they have shown through their actions that they value wealth over family bonds. Cassie has the character, judgment, and values to steward what we've built. This isn't about punishment but protection of Cassie's future and our life's work. The final document was a letter addressed directly to me, dated just 3 months before their accident. Dearest Cassie, if you're reading this, difficult times have likely come. We've made decisions about our estate that will not be popular with your parents. Know that these choices weren't made lightly or in spite, but after years of careful observation and with complete clarity of purpose. Your father and mother have approached us repeatedly throughout their adult lives for financial bailouts. What began as occasional help became constant demands. Despite our attempts to guide them toward financial responsibility, they've chosen paths of spending beyond their means and speculative investments. More importantly, they chose careers and lifestyles over being present for you, the greatest joy and treasure of our lives. While we never spoke ill of them to you, we've watched with breaking hearts as they missed your milestones and formative moments. We leave everything to you not just because we love you, but because we trust you. You've demonstrated wisdom beyond your years in how you approach money, relationships, and ethical decisions. You understand that wealth is a responsibility, not just a privilege. Stand firm in the difficult days that may follow. Know that our decision comes from love, for you and for the business that supports so many families in our community. Your parents may try to pressure or manipulate you. They may even threaten legal action. Our attorney assures us the will is ironclad, but the emotional toll may be heavy. Remember who you are and what we've taught you. Money reveals character, it doesn't create it. Whatever happens, we are proud of the woman you've become. All our love. Grandma and Grandpa. I sat in Grandpa's leather chair until dawn, reading and rereading their words. The letter transformed my understanding completely. This wasn't a random decision or an oversight. My grandparents had deliberately protected both me and their legacy from my parents' financial irresponsibility. The next morning, with newfound clarity and resolve, I called Mr. Brennan. I need the strongest possible legal representation, I said. And I need to understand exactly how secure the will is. I've been waiting for this call, he replied. Your grandparents anticipated everything that's happening. Trust me, Cassandra, their wishes are legally bulletproof. He connected me with Patricia Winters, a formidable estate litigation attorney who specialized in contested wills. Within hours of our consultation, she sent cease and desist letters to both my parents and their attorneys, warning of countersuit for harassment if they continued their current tactics. That afternoon, I changed my phone number, email address, and social media accounts. I informed my employer about the situation, ensuring my parents couldn't access me through work channels. I installed a security system at both my apartment and the family home. The hardest step was sending a final message to my parents. I've read Grandma and Grandpa's private journals and letters. I understand now why they made their decision, and I will honor their wishes completely. Any further contact must go through my attorney. I hope someday we can heal this relationship, but for now, this boundary is necessary. My father responded with threats. My mother with tearful voicemails about family loyalty. I forwarded both to my attorney without listening to them fully. The emotional cost was enormous. I had effectively lost my entire immediate family. Yet alongside the grief came an unexpected sense of liberation. For the first time, I saw my parents clearly, not as I wished they would be, but as they truly were. And I saw myself clearly too, stronger than I'd ever imagined. That evening, alone in my grandparents' house, I felt their presence around me. Not in a mystical way, but in the values they'd instilled, the love they'd shown, and the trust they'd placed in me. I made a promise to them and myself: their legacy would not be dismantled for quick profit. Their faith in me would not be misplaced. The battle lines were drawn. My parents would fight for money. I would fight for something far more valuable: integrity and the true meaning of family legacy. The first meeting with my attorney, Patricia Winters, set the tone for what followed. Unlike the warm, grandfatherly Mr. Brennan, Patricia was all sharp edges and strategic thinking. Her office overlooked Boston Harbor, minimalist and intimidating, like her. I've reviewed everything, she said, pushing her glasses up. Your grandparents created an airtight will. They had full psychiatric evaluations documenting their mental capacity. They included a detailed letter explaining their reasoning. They even video recorded their wishes being stated verbally. She smiled thinly. They knew exactly what was coming. Can my parents still contest it? I asked. They can try, she replied. People can sue for anything. But winning? Nearly impossible. And I'll make the process so painful and expensive they'll regret starting. We formulated a comprehensive strategy. First, formal cease and desist letters went to both parents and their attorneys, documenting the harassment and warning of countersuit if it continued. Second, a restraining order application based on my father's increasingly threatening communications. Third, letters to my workplace and apartment building authorizing them to deny my parents access. My parents' responses came through their lawyers: demands for mediation, settlement offers that started at 50% of the estate and gradually decreased as they realized my resolve. Each was firmly rejected. The situation escalated when my father appeared at my office building lobby, creating a scene that required security intervention. She's stolen my inheritance, he shouted as security escorted him out. My own daughter is a thief. The incident, witnessed by several colleagues, was humiliating but provided grounds for the temporary restraining order Patricia had prepared. The court granted it immediately. My mother's approach was more insidious. She began a whisper campaign among family and social connections, painting me as mentally unstable after my grandparents' death, possibly suffering from money psychosis, not a real condition. Some relatives believed her, others recognized the manipulation and reached out privately to offer support. Through it all, the grief of losing my grandparents remained raw and present. I found myself talking to them in empty rooms, seeking their guidance, missing their wisdom. Complicated grief, my therapist called it, mourning my grandparents while simultaneously losing my parents in a different way. The stress affected every aspect of my life. I lost weight, developed migraines, and struggled to concentrate at work. My boss, understanding but concerned, suggested taking leave. Instead, I reduced my hours temporarily and focused on rebuilding my strength. Grief work is real work, my therapist reminded me during our sessions. And you're grieving multiple losses simultaneously. Following her recommendation, I joined a support group for family estrangement. The stories I heard there, of toxic parents, financial manipulation, emotional blackmail, helped me recognize that my situation, while painful, wasn't unique. More importantly, the group showed me people who had survived similar conflicts and built healthy, happy lives despite family rupture. One night after group, a woman named Heather approached me. "The hardest part," she said quietly, "is accepting that the parents you wish you had don't exist. You're mourning people who were never real." Her words crystallized something I'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. I wasn't just grieving the current conflict but the lifetime of parenting I'd never received. As the legal pressure intensified, my parents' approaches diverged. My father doubled down, hiring additional attorneys and threatening prolonged litigation. My mother, perhaps recognizing the futility, began making tearful appeals to family loyalty and her uncertain future. Patricia remained unmoved. "Classic tactics," she noted. "First intimidation, then guilt. When those fail, they'll try offering olive branches that benefit them. Stay the course." While navigating the legal battlefield, I began addressing my inheritance responsibilities. I scheduled meetings with the management team at Mitchell Furniture to understand the business operations and their vision for the future. The company headquarters visit proved unexpectedly healing. Many employees had worked there for decades and shared stories about my grandparents I'd never heard: Grandpa's annual Christmas bonuses delivered personally with handwritten cards, Grandma organizing meals when an employee's family member was ill, their refusal to lay off workers during the 2008 recession, instead cutting their own salaries. Martin, the production manager who'd worked with Grandpa for 30 years, pulled me aside after the meeting. "They talked about you constantly," he said, eyes misting. "Harold would show us pictures of your college graduation like you'd won the Nobel Prize." He squeezed my shoulder. "They knew exactly what they were doing with the will. Trust that." The visit transformed my perspective on the inheritance. This wasn't just money and property, it was a living legacy that supported families, created beautiful products, and embodied values of craftsmanship and community. The thought of my father liquidating it for quick cash became even more abhorrent. Working with financial advisors, I established a management structure that maintained the company's integrity while allowing me to be involved without micromanaging. I created a profit-sharing program for long-term employees and established a training initiative for new woodworkers, naming it after my grandfather. As weeks passed, the legal threats from my parents began to fizzle. Patricia's aggressive countermeasures and the ironclad will gradually convinced their attorneys that victory was impossible. The restraining order against my father was extended after he violated it by sending threatening emails. The turning point came 4 months after the initial will reading. My father's primary attorney requested a private meeting through Patricia. In her office, he conceded that their position was untenable. "Mr. Mitchell is prepared to drop all claims in exchange for a one-time payment of $2 million, he offered, presenting it as a generous compromise. Patricia's laugh was cold. "Your client has harassed and threatened my client, violated a restraining order, interfered with her employment, and caused significant emotional distress. We will offer no payment. In fact, if litigation continues, we will countersue for harassment and legal fees. The attorney left empty-handed. 2 weeks later, we received formal notification that my father was dropping all claims against the estate. My mother's capitulation followed shortly after, though she included a handwritten note, "I hope you're happy with what you've done to this family." The legal victory brought relief but not joy. I'd won, but at the cost of whatever fragile family bonds had existed. The conflict had exposed the harsh truth that my parents viewed me primarily as an obstacle to wealth rather than a daughter to love. Yet alongside this painful reality came unexpected connections. Distant relatives and family friends reached out, sharing their own stories of my parents' financial irresponsibility and manipulation over the years. Several apologized for believing initial rumors about me stealing the inheritance. My uncle Robert, my father's estranged brother who I barely knew, emailed, "I witnessed what your father did with every opportunity and advantage our parents gave him. Your grandparents made the right choice. Don't doubt that for a second." Most surprising was an email from a woman named Jenna that arrived 6 months after my grandparents' deaths. "You don't know me, but I'm going through something eerily similar with my family. I read about your situation through a mutual connection and wondered if you'd be willing to talk. I'm drowning in guilt and pressure." That email led to coffee, which led to friendship, which led to an informal network of people navigating family estrangement and inheritance conflicts. We shared resources, recommended therapists and attorneys, and simply listened without judgment, something few people can offer when family conflict is involved. As the acute legal battle subsided, I could finally focus on long-term healing. My therapist helped me establish what she called functional grief, finding ways to honor my grandparents' memory while moving forward with my life. I established scholarships in their names at the local community college, focusing on woodworking and business students. I donated to the charities they had supported for decades. At work, I gradually regained my focus and drive. The brief reduction in hours had actually improved my perspective, helping me prioritize more effectively. 6 months after the inheritance bombshell, I received a promotion to senior account manager, an achievement I knew would have made my grandparents proud. The family home in Vermont became my weekend sanctuary. I kept their bedroom intact but slowly made other spaces my own. Gardening in Grandma's flower beds became a form of meditation and connection. Spending time in Grandpa's workshop, learning to use his tools through YouTube videos and local classes, helped me feel his presence. 1 year after my grandparents' deaths, I stood firm in the life they had prepared me for, not just financially but emotionally and ethically. The inheritance had tested my boundaries, resolve, and values in ways I never could have anticipated. The money itself remained largely untouched, invested according to principles Grandpa had taught me, with portions directed to causes they had believed in. The painful estrangement from my parents remained, but its sharp edges had softened into acceptance. They had shown me exactly who they were. Perhaps someday reconciliation might be possible, but only with genuine accountability and changed behavior, not the surface apologies or financial motivations that had characterized their past attempts at connection. In losing the parents who had never truly been present, I had found something more valuable, my own strength, a community of supportive friends, and the certainty that family is defined by love and loyalty, not merely by blood. 6 months after the legal battle subsided, I stood in the renovated showroom of Mitchell Furniture, preparing to cut the ribbon on our expanded woodworking school. The space, formerly used for storage, now housed 10 workbenches, each equipped with carefully selected tools and bathed in natural light from skylights we'd installed. "Harold would have loved this," said Martin, now the company's operations director, as we surveyed the room. Teaching was his passion. The Harold and Martha Mitchell Woodworking Academy would offer free classes to high school students and subsidized programs for adults interested in traditional craftsmanship. It honored my grandparents' legacy while addressing a need they'd often discussed, preserving handcraft skills in an increasingly digital world. The business itself had stabilized after the turbulence following their deaths. Rather than making dramatic changes, I'd focused on thoughtful modernization while preserving core values. We'd expanded our e-commerce platform but maintained the handcrafted quality that defined Mitchell Furniture. Sales had increased 18%, allowing raises for the entire staff. My professional life had evolved as well. After much consideration, I'd left my marketing position to focus full-time on managing my grandparents' legacy. The decision wasn't just about practicality but purpose. Continuing their work felt more meaningful than building advertising campaigns for consumer products. The inheritance that had once felt like an overwhelming burden had become a platform for impact. Working with financial advisors, I'd established the Mitchell Foundation, focusing on education, craft preservation, and community development in Vermont. The first grants had funded woodworking programs in 3 public schools, emergency assistance for local families, and scholarships for first-generation college students. My personal life had found a new rhythm too. I'd kept the apartment in Boston but spent increasing time at the Vermont house, gradually making it my own while preserving the elements that honored my grandparents. Grandma's kitchen remained largely unchanged, but the living room now reflected my tastes alongside family heirlooms. Therapy continued, less frequently but still valuable as I navigated the complex emotions of my family situation. Grief isn't linear, my therapist reminded me during our monthly sessions. It's more like the tide, sometimes it recedes, sometimes it crashes over you unexpectedly. Those waves still came, especially during holidays or family-oriented events. The first Christmas after the inheritance battle had been particularly difficult. I'd declined invitations from friends, not wanting to intrude on their family gatherings, and spent the day alone in Vermont. The emptiness of the house had echoed with memories of past celebrations. Grandpa's reading of A Christmas Carol, Grandma's cinnamon rolls on Christmas morning, the carefully selected gifts they always managed to make personal and meaningful. By the second Christmas, I'd created new traditions. I invited several friends who also had complicated family situations for a chosen family holiday at the Vermont house. We cooked together, exchanged thoughtful but modest gifts, and shared stories of both difficult relatives and people who had positively shaped our lives. It wasn't the same as holidays with my grandparents, but it held its own warmth and meaning. The estrangement from my parents remained, though in different forms. My father had moved his family to California, supposedly for business opportunities but more likely to escape the community where many knew the inheritance story. He'd made no contact since his legal surrender, not even on my birthday or holidays. I'd heard through family connections that he told a revised version of events in his new social circles, casting himself as the victim of ungrateful offspring. My mother's approach had evolved from hostility to sporadic, emotionally manipulative outreach. Every few months, I'd receive lengthy emails oscillating between self-pity and surface apologies, always concluding with indirect references to her financial struggles. I'd responded to the first few with brief, neutral acknowledgments but eventually stopped when it became clear the pattern wouldn't change. In March, almost 18 months after my grandparents' deaths, my mother's narrative shifted dramatically. She called on a Sunday afternoon, my first red flag, as Sunday had been my standing call time with my grandparents. "Cassie, darling," she began, her voice suspiciously warm. "I've been doing a lot of soul-searching and therapy. I realize now how my behavior after your grandparents' deaths must have hurt you." The apology sounded rehearsed but promising until she continued, "I've been working with a spiritual advisor who says we need to clear this karmic debt between us. The path to healing our relationship requires gestures of good faith from both sides." The gesture she suggested was, predictably, financial, helping her purchase a new condo as her current place was filled with negative energy from this difficult period. When I declined, her facade cracked immediately. "You're just like them," she snapped. "Cold, judgmental, holding on to money while family suffers. I gave you life, and this is how you repay me?" After that call, I made the difficult decision to close the door on reconciliation for the foreseeable future. Not out of spite or anger, but self-preservation and clarity. My parents had shown repeatedly that they viewed me primarily as access to money rather than a daughter to love. Accepting that truth, painful as it was, allowed me to stop expecting something they couldn't give. This clarity extended to other relationships as well. I became more discerning about who I allowed into my inner circle, recognizing how the inheritance had revealed character in unexpected ways. Some friends had stepped back, uncomfortable with my changed financial status or believing family should stick together regardless of behavior. Others had shown remarkable loyalty and perspective, treating me no differently while offering support during the conflict. New relationships formed around shared values rather than circumstances. Through the woodworking school, I met Beth, a retired teacher learning carpentry, who became a mentor and friend. The inheritance battles connected me with others navigating similar situations, creating a support network based on mutual understanding. In May, I received an unexpected email from a woman named Carolyn, a former client of my grandparents who had commissioned custom furniture for decades. I was clearing old correspondence and found these letters from Martha, she wrote. I thought you might want them. The attached scans included a letter from just months before my grandparents' accident. In it, Grandma had written, "Our greatest pride remains Cassie. She's grown into exactly the kind of person we hoped, principled, compassionate, and clear-eyed about what matters. Whatever happens to us, we know she'll carry forward not just our name but our values." Those words crystallized something I'd been feeling intuitively. The inheritance wasn't primarily about money but about trust. My grandparents had entrusted me not just with assets but with their legacy, their values, and their hope for the future. Honoring that trust meant more than just managing money wisely. It meant living according to the principles they had taught me. 2 years after inheriting $26 million, I could honestly say the money itself was the least significant part of my grandparents' legacy. The true inheritance was the foundation they had built in me: resilience, discernment, integrity, and the capacity to create family bonds based on love rather than obligation. The business continued to thrive, now employing 23 people with health benefits and profit sharing. The foundation supported initiatives my grandparents would have loved. The woodworking school preserved craftsmanship for a new generation. Most importantly, I had found peace with my decisions and clarity about my path forward. The money that my parents had fought so viciously to control remained largely invested, generating returns that supported causes aligned with my grandparents' values. I continued living modestly by choice, finding that happiness came not from extravagant spending but purposeful living. On the 2nd anniversary of their deaths, I visited their graves with fresh flowers and a heart full of gratitude. "I understand now," I whispered, tracing their names on the shared headstone. "You weren't just leaving me money. You were giving me freedom, freedom from manipulation, freedom to choose my own path, freedom to define family on my own terms." The inheritance that had once felt like a burden now felt like a gift of possibility. Not just financial possibility, but the possibility of building a life aligned with my truest values, surrounded by people who loved me for myself rather than what I could provide. As I stood to leave the cemetery, my phone buzzed with texts from friends checking in, knowing this day would be difficult. Their thoughtfulness reinforced what had become my core understanding. Family isn't defined by DNA but by consistent care, respect, and showing up when it matters. The $26 million inheritance had cost me my relationship with my parents. But it had given me something far more valuable: the truth about who they were, who I was, and what family truly means. In choosing to honor my grandparents' wishes despite enormous pressure, I had discovered my own strength and values. That was the real inheritance, one that couldn't be quantified in dollars but would shape the rest of my life. If you've ever had to make difficult choices to honor someone's legacy or stand firm against family pressure, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. This journey has taught me how many people face similar struggles silently. Please subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories about navigating family complexity and finding strength in difficult circumstances. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most authentic life. Your support means everything as I continue sharing these deeply personal experiences.